We are recording. Hello, greetings everyone, and welcome to Covenant Calendar Club. We are so glad that you are here this evening. We pray that you would be richly blessed as you hear the word of Yahuwah through the mouth of our teachers during this presentation. And for those that are watching us on YouTube, we just want to take a moment and give you a nice warm welcome and say, shall we? Shalom, blessings.
Shalom, everyone.
Shalom, shalom.
Welcome.
And with that greeting to you, we're going to go ahead and get started and turn the presentation over to our instructors this evening. Charlene and Richard, Tim and Jeanette, welcome.
Yes, thank you. And just before I open the PowerPoint, I'd like to tell you there's 51 slides, and this is a continuation of Between the Evenings, or Between the Mixings. So tonight, we're going to be looking at Leviticus 6:20, and the question is this verse going to talk about between the mixings, or is it going to be during the mixings? There's a difference there. So we're going to look at that. There'll be quite a bit of a review as we go through this because a lot of material is brand new. And we know that our mandate for this study of Between the Mixings basically is coming from Proverbs 25, verse 2. It is the glory of Yahuwah to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings is to search out this matter. And absolutely, that's what we're going to be doing tonight. We're just going to keep on searching. And because Isaiah 46, verses 9 to 10 say that you can know the end from the beginning, I'm going to just put this out there that I believe that we can know what's going to happen in the gospel account because of what is happening in the Torah, especially with this phrase, between the evenings or between the mixings. So we have quite a bit of review going throughout for any of our newcomers, so I hope that helps them. And Tim is going to be helping me as well. He's going to start us out on this slide right here.
Yes, this phrase is the crux of the whole study, Ben ha-arbeim. And reading from the right, Ben ha-arbeim. Now I want you to look at the three letters that are highlighted in green. Those Hebrew letters are the word erev. And added on to that word is the yod and the mem. That makes the word erev plural. And the word is arbeim. That's what the English spelling that we get. And it is H6148. And the arbeim are the mixtures. There's one mixture in the evening and one mixture in the morning. So this word arbeim is very, very, very important. It is very instrumental in connecting the word erev to the morning mixture. Point number one, there is only one evening erev in 24 hours. Point number two, there are always two mixtures erev in 24 hours. So this phrase, Ben ha-arbeim, is extremely, extremely important on this study and throughout many studies, actually.
And I just wanted to also make a comment here. When you look up the word number 6148, it will not say RBM. It says arav. And remember, last time we learned that there was two primitive roots for erev, and the first one is 6150, and it means dusky at sundown. And then 6148 is the second primitive root, and it just means mixture. But if you have two mixtures, this RBM here, this is the plural. And so you will not see that word under 6148. So I wanted to make that clarification. But anyway, there is one mixture and there's two mixtures. So we are working with a singular and a plural. We did a little bit of work on that last time, I think it was, about 3 weeks ago. But anyway, we're just doing a really simple slide here tonight, and it is for the placement of both of these daily mixtures. And this is probably just old hat to a lot of you, but for those that are new, there are two places where you'll find these mixtures in a 24-hour cycle. One is at dawn, or the boker, or morning, and it is a twilight mixture. Twilight is a generic term for dawn or dusk. And the second one, of course, is going to be in the evening, a rev, or it's dusk twilight mixture. So there's your two mixtures right there. We're using mixtures in English. In the scriptures, it's really using the word evening or evenings, but mixtures in English actually is the same as RBM in Hebrew, okay? And these mixtures are the foundation of the whole covenant calendar. We're going to have a question on, I think it's one of the very last slides, that's going to actually come back to this little comment right here. Want to remind you that day start is at twilight in the morning. It is not at sunrise. So that is a little bit of a difference there too. But these foundations are right here, rooted in the mixtures. We're going to look at these mixtures and take a look at each one individually. So understanding Bein Ha-RBM, or the Hebrew for between the evenings, it is much better understood in English if you use the word between the mixings. It's a better word in English. And the question is, what mixings are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the mixing of the boker. That's your morning light with the night, that morning boker twilight, and the mixing of a rev dusk twilight. So there's your first mixing in the morning, and then you have your day season of between the two mixings. Your day season is between sunrise and sunset, and then there is another mixing that's in the night season. As soon as it gets to be dark, all the way to the first light of dawn. So there's your two mixings, and we'll be looking at a lot of charts that look just like that. This is a lot of review. Don't forget, there's your Arav evening twilight, and then you have your morning twilight mixture that follows that, where you begin a new day. Up at the top, we're going to look at the very first set of mixings in the Torah. The very first set of mixings in the Torah happens to be called the night season. That one is addressed first, and it comes to us in Exodus 12 and Exodus 16. Now, these two passages are narrative. They're actually stories. So Exodus 12 is talking about the Passover from Egypt, and it's between the mixings when they had this Passover sacrifice and were eating of the Passover lamb. And it was in the night season, and that happened in the night season. That was between the mixings. So the very first set of mixings in the Torah is actually seen during the night season. Now I have a little comment down here in this box at the bottom. In this study, it is easier to relate to the light season as the first set of mixings. But the question is, why has Torah mentioned the night season first? And he's mentioned it first 2 times. I started looking at that and I thought, I wonder why that happened. Because we like to start with the day, don't we? Well, let's look at the second set of mixings. There's your morning twilight mixture. It bypasses the Arav evening, and then with your new dawn twilight, there you have your dawn to dawn day. There's your 24-hour cycle right there. And the second set of mixings that you're going to find in Torah, going to be found, of course, there's only one other option, at the light season, between sunrise and sunset. That is your second set of mixings. But these are not narrative stories. These are all from Torah. And in this case, these light season mixings are from Exodus 29 and Numbers 28. Is talking about the second daily sacrifice, the one in the evening, that is between the sunrise and the sunset during the light season. It also tells us about Passover sacrifices. You'll find this in Leviticus 23 and Numbers chapter 9 for light season between the sunrise and the sunset. And then in Exodus 30, it's commands about when the sanctuary lamps were supposed to be lit. And it uses this phrase, between the mixings. So the first set of between the mixings were narratives, they were stories, and they were the night season, and the second set is commands that are given of when sacrifices and lamps are supposed to be taken care of. So as we've been going through this little session here on Between the Evenings, or Ben Ha RBM, we've been looking at three different sets here of our study, and we already did this the last time. Number one, the patterns for between the mixings in the Torah, and it had alignment with both the day season and the night season. There was nothing that told us that this phrase, between the evenings, has anything to do with day start. There's 11 Torah references, and that's the only place you find this phrase is in Torah. We've already done that study. We've looked through all of those, okay? So we need to now break open part number 2. What about Leviticus 6:20, and what about Deuteronomy 16:6? But tonight we're only going to examine Leviticus 6:20. And we want to see if there is, what is the connection? And then the next study, we're going to look at Deuteronomy 16, and we will hopefully include some patterns about between the mixings about Yahusha's Passover day in the Gospels, okay? But we will do a tiny little bit of work tonight on Deuteronomy 16 to help you get ready for what's coming. Now, when people see something new that they're not really expecting, it's kind of like deer in headlights. And this is exactly what Tim said to me about 2 or 3 weeks ago. He said, Charlene, it's like I don't know what's going on here. And what is deer in headlights? Well, it's like getting a drink from a fire hose. There's lots of water, but you're not getting any drinks. So tonight, I want you to expect some surprise and wonder and some clarity. And also, there's a lot of bunny trails on this. We're going to have to go down a bunny trail, come back out, go down another bunny trail, and come back out. So Leviticus 6:20, I'm calling it section 2A. It's likely going to be the most difficult from what we're doing in this section to the very end. I'm very sure it's the most difficult. But what about Deuteronomy 16:6? That's going to be the next time. I think it has a lot of surprises. So between the two, they're very, very different kinds of studies. Challenges from Leviticus 6 and surprises in Deuteronomy 16. Well, why is Leviticus 6:20 so difficult? And we're going to be going over this verse here in a little bit. And I think it's difficult because there's so many dots to connect in this study. We need to connect some dots between grain offerings and drink offerings. And you're probably saying right now, what in the world does that have to do with between the evenings? Well, we're going to take a look at that. We also need to figure out how to connect dots to this daily sacrifices. So once we learn about the grain and the drink offerings, how does all of this connect to the daily sacrifices? And then what we want to know is when we know the grain offerings and the drink offerings and the daily sacrifices, how does all of that connect to Ben Ha RBM or between the evenings? Like, how does this all work together? In Deuteronomy 16:6, like I said, I believe it's going to have the most surprises, and I think it'll be an interesting surprise. But that passage in Deuteronomy 16 verse 6 addresses only the Passover sacrifices and only upon entrance into the land. That's something interesting too. And then, of course, the same question comes up how does Deuteronomy 16:6 about the Passover sacrifices connect to that phrase, Ben Ha-RBM? Because there was quite a few Passover phrases and verses in Torah, about 5 of them, that connect to Passover. And how is Leviticus 6 going to connect to Deuteronomy 16? We're going to do that connection in the next study. So we'll look at Leviticus 6 today. And we're going to have to see, how does all of this stuff connect? And does it connect with this phrase, between the evenings, or between the mixings? So Leviticus 6:20 is actually talking about a grain offering, but we're going to have to address the drink offering as well. I'm going to try to share a little bit of information with you tonight on what this is all about. The whole passage in Leviticus 6 verses 14 to 23, if you look it up in your Bibles, you'll see that it's talking about the grain offerings. And this is what it says in verse 20 specifically. And you can see there are some words there that are highlighted in green. They're very important. This is the offering of Aaron and of his sons, which they shall offer unto Yahuwah in the day when he is anointed, the 10th part of an ephah of fine flour for a grain or meat offering. A grain offering or a meat offering, those are interchangeable terms, okay? So it's a 10th part of an ephah of fine flour for the grain offering perpetual, half of it in the morning, and half thereof is at night. So here's the instructions on how this offering is supposed to be divvied out. Now, as I was going through this study and looking at some different things, I found that the scriptures have a lot less mention about the drink offering, even though it is connected to the grain offering. You have to really look to find information on the drink offering. And this whole thing is about once you come into the land. These instructions were not for their 40 years of wilderness wandering. It was when you come into the land. That is where the drink offering was to accompany the grain offering, and it had to go along with voluntary daily burnt offerings and peace offerings or sacrifices. There's all kinds of things happening at the altar. Now, I also found it really interesting that the priests could partake of the grain offering, but not the drink offering. They were not allowed to touch it. It was always poured out. I didn't know that. And I went and started to look to see what was happening with that drink offering. I'm just going to touch on a little tiny bit about Deuteronomy 16:6, and it's about a Passover. The whole verses in this section are about Passover, and again, it's about entrance into the land of Canaan. And just let me read it, because you've heard this verse before. But at the place which Yahuwah thy Elohim shall choose to place his name, and I'm saying that was at Jerusalem eventually, because there was many times in between, that is where you shall sacrifice the Passover at even, at the going down of the sun, at the season that thou camest forth out of Egypt. Now those words, at even, you know what? They are commonly used to define creation's day start as at the going down of the sun, in fact, as sunset. So what I've heard over and over and over, there's the proof right there in Torah, that you shall choose to do your sacrifices. This is the Passover at even, at the going down of the sun. And right there, people build their sunset day. Interesting enough, this verse does not use the phrase Ben Ha-RBM. We're going to look at that in our next study. It's not here, not in this verse. That's a surprise. And I have a question. Are Passover sacrifices disqualified from Ben Ha-RBM? This is talking about Passover sacrifices, but there is nothing in this verse, is there, about Ben Ha-RBM? Or maybe there is something in the verse about that. We're going to look at that next week. I am going to do the shortest little teaching on sacrifices and offerings that you're ever going to hear in your life on this slide. This is a lot of research. I never really understood it, but we're just going to do it in a nutshell, and it isn't going to cover every step, obviously, but just so that you can understand what we're talking about, so that you know where this grain offering belongs. Now, every day in the morning and the evening, there were voluntary offerings that the priest had to offer at the sanctuary. One was called a burnt offering, and this was an offering of dedication, a sacrifice. And the other one was a peace offering, and it was for fellowship. These were not for sins or transgressions. This is just to come into holiness, into worship, to dedication and fellowship and thanksgiving. So this was to be happening every morning and every evening on the altar. Along with the burnt offering and the peace offering, what I found was the grain or the meat offering, which was one of thankfulness, was put on top of these two offerings on the altar. They were always offered together. Now remember, I already told you that the priest could partake of the grain offering. They could have some of the flour, and if you couldn't bring unleavened cakes or bread or whatever, you could bring finely ground flour. And the priest could have some of the flour. He could have some of the unleavened bread. He could have partake of some of that. So grain and meat offerings, or the grain meat, the same term, okay, were always offered with the burnt and the peace offering. But there was a drink wine offering that was also offered together with these three other offerings. And this drink offering was one of victory. It was always offered with the grain offering, although you don't find it in a lot of places in the Torah, okay? But it was. However, there was a catch. This belonged to Yahuwah, and it was always poured out. Sometimes it was poured out on top of the sacrifices, and sometimes it was poured out at the base of the altar. And you can go and look in Leviticus chapters 1 to 7, or Numbers 28 to 28 and 29, those chapters, for the offering requirements. And there's just all kinds of it there to look at. So I'm just giving you a little brief overview. Now, there was some compulsory offerings for the individuals. These ones that you see on the left were what the priests were doing at the sanctuary. It doesn't matter if you wanted to bring a burnt offering, you could bring that as well. But I'm just showing you what was happening at the altar every morning and every evening, okay? If there was an individual that needed to bring an offering, one of those offerings was a sin offering. And just in short, I don't know if I can even answer all the questions around this. Could have been intentional, or they can be unintentional. That means it could be a sin. You could have done something wrong and you didn't realize that you did something wrong. But when you figured it out, or somebody came and told you, then that was an instance where you would have to bring a sin offering, okay? Now there's another one. It's called a trespass offering. And the closest I could come to understanding this and telling you in just a little bit is that this is a sin against others, but it includes restitution. This is where you would bring your sacrifice and you would tell the priest what you did, or maybe it was your ox gored another ox, and so there has to be restitution. Well, you know, you got to pay back 4 more or whatever. But anyway, this is something apparently to do with restitution. What I did find is that drink offerings were never included. I'm saying never, and if I'm wrong, somebody correct me, but this was all that I could find, is that drink offerings were not included with the sin offering and the trespass offering. However, if you brought a sin offering and you had also brought a burnt offering and a peace offering, then guess what? That burnt offering and the peace offering has to have a grain offering and a drink offering to go with it. But the drink offering has nothing to do with the sin or the trespass offering. That is as much as I could understand. It's just a huge study. I would encourage anybody to study these sacrifices. I think there's a lot of information in there that we're missing. But the question is, where does the Passover offering belong? Because it's not included in this list. And we have 5 phrases in the Torah or between the evenings that are addressing Passover specifically? So I'd like you to keep that question in your mind. Let's keep going here. We'll do a little bit of review on some of this stuff so that you can kind of keep it together. These sacrifices that go together with Ben Ha-RBM, there's 11 of them. Out of the 11 Torah references, 9 of them are referring to sacrifices that are attached to this phrase, between the mixings. Out of those 9, there are 4 Torah references, and they address the Exodus 29 daily sacrifices. Now don't forget, the daily sacrifices, that's going to include the meat drink offering with this phrase, between the evenings, both the grain and the drink, or whatever, both of those have to go together. And in Leviticus 6, 14 to 23, that whole passage, it specifically addresses the law of the meat grain offering, which was always accompanied by the drink or the wine offering. And all of these offerings are always unleavened. There is never anything leavened that goes on the altar. 5 of those Torah references are directly related to Passover, using this term Ben Ha-RBM, or between the mixings. 5 of them, so it has the majority. And in Deuteronomy 16, verses 1 to 8, it specifically addresses the Passover sacrifice, and it doesn't use this phrase, between the mixings, in Deuteronomy. And I just found that very, very interesting. We'll find out next time why. Actually, the whole chapter of Deuteronomy 16 is talking about a lot of different sacrifices, but the first 8 verses actually talk about Passover. So for the rest of this study, what we're going to do is focus on the time frame of sacrifices and offerings through the lens of Leviticus 6:20. And then next study, we will look at it through Deuteronomy 16:6, and hopefully we'll get to the gospel account. So Deuteronomy 16:6. Neither one of these verses uses this term Ben Ha-RBM. And what does that mean? So you might be saying to me, well, Charlene, why did you even choose these 2 verses if we're supposed to be studying between the mixings? What are those verses doing in here? Well, we'll take a look. Will these 2 scriptures have anything to do with the daily sacrifices or the Passover sacrifices? If so, would these sacrifices be connected to that phrase Ben Ha-RBM, or that phrase between the mixings? We already know that they are. But these 2 verses address similar things. So let's just take a little look here. Here's my question. How does the Passover sacrifice compare to the burnt offering and the peace offering? How does the Passover sacrifice compare to the meat and the drink offering? How does it compare to the sin offering? And how does it compare to the trespass offering? We know that the Passover sacrifice has blood involved, so we might be able to see how it compares to the blood offerings, but how does it compare to the meat and the drink offering? Those are questions that you should be asking. So we're just going to do a little short review on some of these offerings so I can give you a little bit more information, because it is part of solving this puzzle that we're looking at. So as we go to the next slide, I'm just doing a little bit of a detail on these offerings so that you can have an idea of what's going on, because they all had special requirements. And before we can give any consideration to either Leviticus 6:20 or Deuteronomy 16:6, we need to have some of these details. And we need some of these details before we can even compare to the Passover sacrifice. So the burnt sacrifice, it was the first one, okay? It was the first of the blood offerings that went on the altar. And it could be a bull, a ram, or a lamb, had to be of the first year. Or it could be a bird, which could be a dove or a young pigeon if you were really poor. but it had to be completely consumed on the altar. There could not be any defects, and it was always given as a gift or something in dedication. Then the peace offering followed that one, and it was that second blood offering. These were both offered in the morning and in the evening. The peace sacrifice had to be an animal. It could not have any defects. It could be from the herd or the flock. It could be from a variety of breeds. And it was also connected to a voluntary act of worship. And it also was attended with a banquet for thanks. And it was eaten at night. And it was also attended with vows. So let me explain this. The peace offering was offered every single day at the altar by the priest. But if there was something that an individual family was really thankful for, they could say, we want to go give a peace offering, a thank offering, okay? So they could choose one of their animals from their herd. They would go and they would offer it as a sacrifice at the tabernacle. And I do believe that the priest got a portion of this particular sacrifice, and then they would take the rest home, and they would have a banquet for their family or their friends, and they would appreciate and enjoy this, whatever it was. If it was safety from a trip, or they were just abundantly blessed with something, this would be a thank offering. This would be the only way that you could eat an animal. A sacrificial animal. You had to first offer it as a peace sacrifice. If you had a vow that you had made and your vow was finishing, you would also bring it in commemoration that you were finishing a vow. But there was a little bit something different connected to the vow. You could eat of that sacrifice on the second day if it was for a vow. If it was just for thanks, you could only eat of it on that one night, and then the rest had to be disposed. So you could offer, individuals could offer this peace sacrifice. It was also called a heave offering, I think. Now, I really should have had the grain and drink offering between these two, but I've put it at the bottom here for a reason. But just to let you know, the grain and the drink offerings always went with the burnt sacrifice and the peace sacrifice, okay? But I have put it here at the bottom for a specific reason this time. The sin sacrifice was a blood offering for intentional or unintentional sins, especially sin against Yahuwah. And if it was the high priest, he had to bring a young bull. If it was a leader, he had to bring a male goat. If it was a common person, they could bring a female goat. If it was someone poor, they could bring a dove or a pigeon. And if you were very poor, you could bring a 1/10 ephah of fine flour. And by the way, in my research, to get fine flour, you had to actually grind it fine in front of the priest, from what I understand, and it did take a long time. So there was a lot of effort put into this, to these sacrifices, even if it was just a grain offering. The trespass sacrifice was, again, that blood offering for an intentional sin, something that you said you were going to do and you did it. This one is, of course, going to come with the ramifications. But a ram was used for intentional sin. And look, it had to be eaten within the court of the tabernacle. Okay, that was something that was specific for this. The grain and the drink offerings were, of course, bloodless offerings, and they always attended the burnt offering and the peace offering. The grain was always unleavened bread, or it could be flour. It was always attended with oil and salt. It could be in the form of bread or cakes or wafers, but it was always unleavened, and frankincense always, went with it as well. It was always eaten in the court, or it was always given in the court. The drink offering, of course, was the grape juice. There was no yeast. There was no honey. It was poured out at the base of the altar, or it could be poured out on top of the peace offering or the burnt offering. Now, and there's a lot of questions. I think I have 22 questions in this study. Here's another one. Why is the Passover not listed as one of these main sacrifices? It's not in the list. And when I was looking through all of these, I'm thinking, why is the Passover sacrifice always missing? And I began to wonder. So let's go look at this Passover sacrifice. And I picked out the verses in Exodus 12, because that's the first place that you have all the details for Passover. And we've gone through the list of all these offerings and what the requirements were for. But let's just read. In verse 5, it says, your lamb shall be without blemish. Well, that was just like the burnt offering and the peace offering. It needs to be a male. That's like the sin offering. It has to be of the first year. That was like the burnt offering. And they were told that they needed to take it from their sheep, just like the peace offering, or they could take it from the goats, just like the sin offering. And then in verse 8 it says, and you shall eat the flesh in that night. Well, that was like the peace offering. They had to eat it the same day. It said you had to roast it with fire, his head and his legs, with all the pertinence thereof. Well, look at that. The burnt offering had to be completely consumed, just like this Passover one. The whole animal had to be roasted. And then in verse 22 it says, and none of you shall go out of the door of his house until the morning. Well, that was like the trespass offering. They had to eat it in the court, and they couldn't leave until they had. Whatever they were doing, it had to be done at the court. So when I looked at that, I saw that the Passover sacrifice has little components from all of these offerings, whether they're a blood offering or a grain offering or a drink offering. The Passover has something there. But I couldn't really find any information that was directly linking to the grain offering and the drink offering, but we know that there has to be something there, but I couldn't find it right in his scripture, especially not with the phrase Ben Ha-RBM. So then I began to think, is the Passover lamb the ultimate sacrifice? Like the ultimate one, the best one of all the sacrifices? It seems like this Passover sacrifice is so unique and so special because it contains components from every blood offering. I couldn't really find a scriptural account where the Passover lamb was offered with grain and drink offerings. But I know you might be thinking something, and I hope you are. But I'm asking, why not? Why didn't the Passover lamb get offered with a grain and a drink offering? And is there something else that we need to look at and consider about all of this? And here's one of these bunny trails that we need to look at. It's about the sin and the trespass offerings. I've already told you about it. Just look over the sin offering. It had to have a male goat. It was male. And remember, it was for intentional or unintentional sins against Yahuwah. No grain or drink offerings with the sin offering, and no grain or drink offerings with the trespass offering. But the trespass offering, it had to be eaten within the court, just like the Passover lamb was to be eaten at home. And we'll remember that the grain and the drink offerings were never ever offered with the sin or the trespass offerings. This grain offering expresses thanks for Yahuwah's provision and his goodwill. And the drink offering is there to express joy in the completion of the work, not the completing, but the completion of the work. The grain offering and the drink offering were never offered with the sin and the trespass offering. Why? Because the sinner is still overcoming, and he has not experienced the joy of a total victory yet. That is the closest that I could find. Now, if that person did happen to bring a burnt offering or a peace offering, then yes, the grain and the drink offering would go with those, but not with the sin trespass offerings. It would not come to that. Okay, Tim said that he would help us with slides 21 and 22. Let's see what's happening here with the drink and the wine offering.
And here's another one of those bunny trails.
Yeah.
The uniqueness of the drink and wine offering. When is the wine poured out? At the beginning of the day? Or do you pour out the wine at the end of the day? At the end of the day is when the wine is poured out to relax and enjoy the fruit of the day's labors. At the end of Yahusha's earthly ministry, Luke 22:17-18, and he took the cup and gave thanks and said, take this and divide it among yourselves. Verse 18, for I say unto you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of Yahuwah shall come. Yahusha will drink the wine with us with joy at the completion of his work.
Yes, and when I came across this, I was thinking, you know what? That's exactly the way it is today. You don't really see people pouring a glass of wine to get started in the morning. They're drinking coffee, right? But at the end of the day, when their work is done, many people will have a glass of wine and they will sit down and they'll relax. Well, this is the way it was in the Torah times, but it was not leavened, it was unleavened. So let's just continue on looking at this drink wine offering. It's just part of that bunny trail.
Torah's meaning of drink and wine offering. Mentioned only 3 times in Leviticus, only in chapter 23. First fruits, Pentecost, and in connection with the daily burnt and peace offerings of each day. There are more details for the drink offering in Numbers 15 and 28. And the drink offering was to be offered with all daily offerings and the grain offering. It was never to be offered except in the land of promise. The law of the drink offering is clear. Yahuwah promised he would not accept the wine of the grain offering until his people entered the land after the 40 years in the wilderness. Drinking wine is a sign meaning rest and celebration only after Yahuwah defeated the enemies. Then he gave these drink offering instructions, and then he would accept the libation of wine where huge clusters of grapes grew. Once in the land, Yahuwah provided grapes for the drink offering. The drink offering was a sign of his victory for the people. The priests were completely excluded from partaking of this offering. The people's portion, they only brought the works of their labors. At the end of the sin problem, Yahusha will have a victory drink with the redeemed. What a joy that will be to be there with him.
Yeah, so it makes a lot more sense now that I understood the drink offering a little bit better. Now I began to understand why it was always poured out, because we haven't gotten to that final victory yet. This victory was always attributed to Yahuwah. It never ever went to the people the 12 tribes, never. It was always he that got the victory. So that's what this drink offering is all about. It was always poured out because it was he that was giving the victory. So we need to get started with Leviticus 6:20 and this law of the grain offering to see what's going on here. I had to give you that introduction so you maybe would have a little bit of an idea what's going on. It's also known as a meat offering. Leviticus 6:20 has content about the grain offering that is to be offered with every blood sacrifice, and it also was with the drink offering. It does not contain this phrase, Ben Ha-RBM. It's just not there. And the question is, what could be the connection of this grain meat offering to Ben Ha-RBM, and does it even matter? That is the question. And I'm wondering if it's another puzzle piece that we need to be looking at. We're going to try to break this open tonight. The law of this grain offering, and of course it always goes along with the drink offering, don't ever forget that, has really specific instructions. And these grain offerings could be presented as a wave sheaf on first fruits. It could be with the 2 loaves on Pentecost. It could be presented with this offering of jealousy for the cleansing of a leper. For the meal sin offering, it could be a handful of flour, something to do with the showbread. I haven't studied each one of these points. We'd be here probably for a year. And also Passover cakes. But remember, the grain offering has to always accompany every morning and evening daily sacrifice. Now, just a little note of interest, just for something to think about. Cain's offering, remember, it was unacceptable because it was not attended with a blood sacrifice. But Abel's blood sacrifice was accepted. But don't forget, you have to also bring the required grain and drink offerings. So Abel brought his fruit of the land, but he didn't bring the blood sacrifice. You had to bring them both. Because Abel's blood sacrifice was accepted, that actually meant that he had the grain and the drink offerings to go with it, because the three go together. And all these instructions, you can go and read them in Leviticus chapters 1 to 7 and Numbers 28 and 29, and bits and pieces are scattered all over the Torah. The burnt and peace sacrifices were never acceptable without that grain and drink offering. This study in Leviticus 6:20 is intricately combined with the evening daily sacrifices. We're going to show you how that works. So the question is, what does that grain offering of Leviticus 6:20 have to do with the term Ben Ha-RBM? And what has it got to do with the daily sacrifices? Has it got anything to do with Boker, or is it just a Rev? Is it both, or is it just one or the other? Lots of questions here. I'd rather be doing a discussion than a teaching right now. But anyway, the law of these daily offerings, we need to go back and look at that. It's in Exodus 29. Verse 39 is the verse that I'm choosing tonight. Verse 41 works as well. But this is the daily offerings. One lamb thou shalt offer in the morning, and that is 12:42, it's Boker. And the other lamb thou shalt offer at even. This is 6153, but if you remember, when we looked in the interlinear, it was actually saying Ben Ha-RBM, between the mixings. And these two daily offerings always included the burnt offering, the peace offering was put on top, and then the grain offering with the oil, salt, and frankincense always accompanied those two, and we always have a drink offering. It's poured on top of them, or it's actually poured out at the base of the altar. These daily sacrifices, every single one of them, in the morning and in the evening, are connected to this phrase, Ben Ha-RBM, or between the mixings. Now Tim is going to help us with the next 3 slides on a little bit of information from the scriptures, from the Torah, about these offerings. Like I said, it's a really big study, but we'll give you a little bit to look at tonight.
Numbers 28, the law of the daily offerings. Now Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, command the children of Israel, and say to them, my offering, my food for my offerings, made by fire as a sweet aroma to me, you shall be careful to offer to me at their appointed time. And you shall say to them, this is the offering made by fire, which you shall offer to Yahuwah, 2 male lambs in their first year without blemish, day by day, as a regular burnt offering. The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, the other lamb you shall offer in the evening. And 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a grain offering, mixed with 1/4 of a hin of pressed oil. It is a regular burnt offering, which was ordained at Mount Sinai for a sweet aroma, an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. And its drink offering shall be 1/4 of a hin for each lamb. In a holy place you shall pour out the drink to Yahuwah as an offering. The other lamb you shall offer in the evening, as in the morning grain offering, and its drink offering. You shall offer it as an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to Yahuwah.
I'm sure glad we don't have to do that anymore, right? Let's look at number 6, because this is going to have several offerings named together in this one verse, verse 17.
Number 6, several offerings named together. Number 6:17. And he shall offer the ram as a sacrifice of a peace offering to Yahuwah, with the basket of unleavened bread. The priest shall also offer its grain offering and its drink offering. Numbers 29, several offerings named together. Numbers 29:39. These you shall present to Yahuwah at your appointed feasts, besides your vowed offerings and your freewill offerings, as your burnt offerings and your grain offerings, as your drink offerings and your peace offerings.
That one has all of them. There's lots of studying to do with this, and I think we could all learn a lot. But let's get going on Leviticus 6:20 and this grain offering. Remembering that the time frame for the evening sacrifices from Exodus 29 is using that phrase between the mixings, and that places this time frame during the day season, but it seems to avoid the possibility of the evening sacrifice taking place during the evening twilight. That's what seems to be happening with Leviticus 6:20. And we're wondering, is this notion is correct or not? Here's the interlinear, okay, and there's your 6153 in that red box. In Leviticus 6:20, you can notice that the English word and the Hebrew word number that is used for the sacrificial time frame of the second daily sacrifice there is 6153. And it says at night. And it's using the Hebrew word erev, or evening, and the number is 6153. It looks like there's something interesting happening here. Yes, Leviticus 6:20 uses the word night for 6153, which is normally erev, or evening. But most of us, when we read the word night in our scriptures, we're expecting, or we suspect, that this will be defined as Leal, or the literal darkness during the night season. So when we see night, we're actually probably first going to think of the night season. And here's what this verse says. This is the grain offering of Aaron and of his sons, which they shall offer unto Yahuwah, the tenth part of an ephah of fine flour for a meat offering perpetual, half of it in the morning, and half at night. And the word night is Rev 6153. When we look up that word 6153, it is dusk. That's the very first definition, dusk. If you look up 6150, that is the first primitive root, and it will actually say dusky at sundown. I'm saying there's a second definition that can be used as day, not as often, but it is there. And a third definition is night. This is one of those verses that uses the word night using Rev 6153. And I don't know if there's others. I haven't gone and looked, but there's going to be just a few of them because it's the last definition. Why is it using night? For the phrase at night, where would that time frame be placed during each 24-hour cycle? At night? Well, the only allowed placement for night, which is 6153, can only be up to the very darkest part of dusk, and that would be just before Leal, or night. This phrase, at night, absolutely does not qualify for the night season of Ben Ha-RBM, or the mixing at the night season, okay? Or between the mixing, pardon me, between the mixings for the night season. Because 6153, a Rev, is a mixing. It's a mixing of light and darkness. And this is one of those places where a Rev's third definition of night can be used accurately. And maybe there's only one. I haven't had a chance to go and look yet. And definitely in Leviticus 6:20, there is no context here for anything to do with day start, basically. It's just telling you when this grain offering was being offered or could be offered. Oh, here's a little bunny trail on this Leviticus 6:20 and about this second daily sacrifice, not the first one, the second one, having to do with Erev night. Leviticus 6:20 has nothing to indicate any new day begins with evening twilight. The context of Leviticus 6:20 is completely about the grain offering that always attends both the burnt offering and the peace offering when that happened to occur either between the mixings or in the dusky part of the day. And this definitely is not anything to do with day start specifically. This particular verse completely bypasses that phrase Ben ha-RBM that is used in Exodus 29 for the evening sacrifice. And that evening sacrifice was always to be offered on the same day as the Boker morning sacrifice. That part's really important. According to Leviticus 6:20, that evening sacrifice was stretched all the way up to the Erev night portion. And the sacrifice and the bloodless offerings are all still considered as being offered on the same day. Well, that only means one thing, that sunset did not begin a new day. If these sacrifices were being offered during the dusky part and sunset actually starts a new day, then these sacrifices would have been offered on the next day, not the same day. Now, I'm going to throw in a little monkey wrench here. Just a comment, just to think about. This grain offering in Leviticus 6 is not precisely connected to any Passover sacrifice specifically during dusk. We're not really talking about Passover sacrifices yet, but I'm just throwing that in there for you to think about. Leviticus 6:20 defines a bloodless offering. It's offered at night, 6153, and it's still on the same day. And that also provides for other sacrifices to be offered together right at the brink of the night season. Because the grain offering doesn't go by itself. It's always got the burnt offering and the peace offering to go with it. Now, will this pattern have any effect on the testimony of King Josiah in 2 Chronicles 35? Like, where do we find a witness of this? But before we go and look at that, let's have some thoughts to ponder and some questions to think about before we go on another bunny trail. Number one, between the mixings, that allows for the daily evening sacrifice to be offered during the light season. That would be between sunrise and sunset. That would be the day season. Leviticus 6:20 allows for the grain meat offering to be offered with the second daily blood sacrifice all the way up to the darkest part of night, and it's being called Erev 6153. Then that means that these evening sacrifices were also allowed to be offered, look, during the dusk twilight, and that is not during the light season, and it's not during the night season. It is not between the mixings, it is during the mixing. And I was wondering, was there any witnesses for sacrifices that were offered in the light season that went all the way up to the night portion or right up to Lael? Is there any witnesses in the scripture? Well, yes, there is. It's a bunny trail again. King Josiah. He had a wonderful, huge Passover in Jerusalem. In fact, when they were offering Passover sacrifices, there were 41 during the light season, all the way up to night. And it does say 3915 when you look it up. That phrase, between the mixings, has to apply to the day season. In 2 Chronicles 35:14, part of the verse, it says the sons of Aaron were busy in offering burnt offerings and fat until night, and it was Lael 3915. So in order to offer all of those Passover sacrifices, they were offering them in the day season between the mixings of dawn and dusk, and it went all the way up to the night. So the only allowed placement for the night for 3915 or Lael, it begins at the darkest part of dusk, and that's where the Lael is ushered in. So they were offering sacrifices all day long, right up to the night, all during the day season, all the way through the mixing, right up to night. And definitely, this has got something to do with day start. Is there a context for day start here, or is there not? Let's conclude Josiah's Passover. This was in 624 BC, so this is a long time after Torah. Long time after Torah. Let's do a conclusion. All of the Passover sacrifices have to be offered on the Passover day cycle. They can't be on the next day or the day before. In 2 Chronicles, it clearly states that the burnt offerings were offered until night, or Lael, right after the context of all of the Passover offerings. They had burnt offerings and peace offerings as well as the Passover sacrifices. And always remember, you have to have the grain and the drink offerings. They have to be there with the burnt offerings and the peace offerings. The Passover in 2 Chronicle 35 completely bypasses that phrase, Ben Ha-RBM. You can't find it. It's not in there. So you have to just think about what's happening. That Passover sacrifice was offered during the day all the way through the mixing. Ben Ha-RBM during the day season, right through the dusk mixing. Those Passover sacrifices were always to be offered on the same day as the Boker sacrifice, the one in the morning. Is there a context here for day start? Absolutely there is. Definitely there is. So according to 2 Chronicles, the Passover and the evening sacrifices, they also stretched all the way to the night season. This is one of those testimonies. This study is really neat. It's a dawn day study, and this is one of those testimonies of a dawn day study where there is a key for covenant calendar, and this key is breaking open this phrase, Ben Ha-RBM. We didn't know this years ago when we did this study. It's really neat. Sunset did not begin a new day in this one either, because all of these sacrifices were on the same day. So they had Passover sacrifices during the day season, and sacrifices of the evening sacrifices went all the way through the mixing, and was all on the same day. We're just going to pose a question here about Moses in Deuteronomy 16:6. What will Moses have to say about Passover sacrifices being offered during the dusk twilight? Will Deuteronomy 16:6 be able to qualify for Ben Ha-RBM? We've already sort of asked that question once already. What about Passover sacrifices in Jerusalem? Another bunny trail, because Josiah was at 624. Now this is moving up into Jerusalem with Josiah, or Josephus, I mean. This phrase, between the mixings, has to allow for Passover sacrifices to be performed during the light season. And we already did this quote last week where Josephus writes of many Passover sacrifices that happened during the light season. And he actually said between, what did he say? Between the 9th hour and the 11th hour, but that is between sunrise and sunset. He in fact stated that 256,500 Passover sacrifices were slain from the 9th hour to the 11th hour, and that is a lot of sacrifices. Let's look at some commands of Moses. This is just a little tiny peek. We're just peeking today on bunny trail number 4. Did Moses give alternate permission for Passover sacrifices to be offered during the dusk mixing? We've seen lots of evidence there for between sunrise and sunset, but what about during this mixing? There's only one allowed placement for during the mixing, and that's the dusk twilight time frame. This is for the evening sacrifice. Did he give permission for that? And in the next study, we're going to look and see if Moses gave permission to offer the Passover sacrifice between sunrise and noon. We're going to take a look at that as well. Now I'd like to go back and look at these lamps. These lamps that were lit in Exodus 38, this was in the last study, and compare that to the grain offerings. What it said in Exodus 30 verse 8, and it uses this phrase between the mixings for lighting the sanctuary lamps. So what is happening here is that the lamps would be trimmed during the day season, but it was usually after that evening daily offering. And of course, the grain and the drink offerings went with it, okay? In Leviticus 6:20, it allows for the grain offering to be given up to the darkest part of the Erev night time frame, right up to the darkest part. Okay, these lamps, when do these lamps get trimmed? Okay, because what we had seen before is they get trimmed after all the sacrifices are done. So it looks like there could be some questions that need to have some answers. Grain offerings and lighting the lamps. Number one, when the grain offering was tended to at the Erev night, were the lamps trimmed after the grain offering going into the night season? Or were the lamps trimmed somehow during the day season or during the mixing? When were these lamps trimmed? Okay, and number two, would the tending to the lamps be unusually later on days if there were a lot of festival sacrifices? Some of these days during the year of different festivals had a lot of sacrifices. So would the tending of the lamps be just pushed and pushed and pushed until all the sacrifices were done, and they would be done maybe even during the night season? Will the lamps shed some light on this whole question? And will these puzzle pieces fit together? Well, let's take a look. Do this bunny trail for Aaron and the sanctuary lamps. In Exodus 30 verse 7, it talks about the lamps and how they're dressed in the morning. And then in verse 8, it says this, and when Aaron lighteth the lamps at even, and it's between the mixings, okay? You can see it right there. He shall burn incense upon it, a perpetual incense before Yahuwah throughout your generations. So this evening is actually talking about between the mixings. This would be during the day season. Now, on a daily basis, the lamps were tended to after the daily evening sacrifice and after the grain and the drink offerings were offered during the day season, or Ben RBM. Then the lamps were taken care of. But Leviticus 6:20 has the grain offering placed just before the night. It was during the day season. So do we have a conflict here with these lamps and this grain offering? Let's do bunny trail number 6 about these sanctuary lamps. Were they tended to during the day season, or was it during dusk? Was my question. So I just want you to contemplate this thought, and then we're going to look at 2 points. Because the lamps are tended to after the evening burnt offering, which is the peace offering, and the grain and the drink offerings, the lamps will be trimmed after the dusk twilight going on into the night season. If those offerings go into the mixing and right up to the night, then the lamps have to be trimmed after that. They won't be trimmed during the day season. So what does that mean? Well, on the days when there were several additional sacrifices being offered due to all the extra requirements that certain feasts had, and especially tabernacles, had a lot of sacrifices every day, it is very possible that the sanctuary lamps were not trimmed until Lael or until night. Very possible. But now think about this. On the Passover day, when there were thousands of lambs being slain, it is totally reasonable that the lamps would not have been trimmed until the night season. It just wouldn't have happened. There wouldn't have been time. So Leviticus 6:20's placement of the evening sacrifice at twilight just might have something for us to think about. Let's look at some facts that we've established. That grain offering is always given with the blood sacrifice and always goes with the drink offering. Those are never ever separated. Leviticus 6:20 is placing that daily evening sacrifice with the grain offering right up to the dusk twilight, right on the border edges of the night season. That's what Leviticus 6:20 is doing. But this law of the grain offering allows for the evening sacrifice to be during the dusk twilight, and that would complement the morning twilight sacrifices at the boker in the morning twilight with its offerings, the grain and the drink. And a fact that we want to establish really soon, there were many, many commands for extra sacrifices to be offered throughout the year on various special occasions. So is it looking like, or does it appear that the Rev time frame is allowing for an overflow of a whole bunch of extra sacrifices like it did for King Josiah? Does it look like there's a provision there? Let's look at Leviticus 6:20 and the lighting of these sanctuary lamps. Because of that grain offering being offered at dusk twilight, right at the edges of Lael night with that evening sacrifice, that means that the trimming of the lamps has to follow that evening sacrifice. In that instance, the lamps will be trimmed at the very darkest part of dusk, just before Lael. That is what it appears to be saying, before they're totally out. Has this got anything to do with the context for day start? I believe it does. The Exodus 30, verse 8 lamps cannot be fully understood unless the information is aligned with Leviticus 6:20. Why? Because the grain offering, the evening sacrifices, and the lamp trimming, along with the drink offering as well, everything is bound together. It's a bundle. So if the grain offering is offered just before the Lael night, the whole bundle goes together and the lamps are trimmed after that. And the question is, do we see how these two puzzle pieces came together? I'd like to put this up for some audience participation after our teaching is done. What do we know about Exodus 30, verse 8, about the lamps? They were trimmed after the evening sacrifices were completed. Whether that was during the day season or between the mixings, whether it was at dusk or whether it was right up to night. That's what we know about the lamps. And how does the trimming of the lamps link to Leviticus 6:20? And let's see what we know about Leviticus 6:20. Because this phrase does not use Ben ha-RBM. However, it does show that the grain offering that has to attend those other offerings is during the time frame of the Erev mixing right up to the night. And this in turn provides for the Ben ha-RBM sacrifices that were normally during the day season. They could be offered right up through the dusk, right up through the dusk up to the night. So is Leviticus 6:20 actually connected to Ben ha-RBM, or between the mixings after all? Is there a little connection there? Just have three questions. Yes, Leviticus 6:20 provides for a dusk twilight sacrifice and offerings. Question number one, we want to look at these three questions because they are going to dovetail into the next study. Could it be that the evening sacrifice was supposed to always be offered during the dusk twilight on ordinary days? Leviticus 6:20 might have a puzzle piece. Is it providing some options for the gospel account That's my question. Is there a puzzle here for what's going to happen in the gospel account? Question number 2 for Leviticus 6:20. Could it be that Exodus 29 commands for the evening sacrifice during the 2 optional Ben Ha-RBM, that's the day or the night season, had something to do with another very important sacrifice? Exodus 29 is the commands for the daily sacrifices in the morning and in the evening. Do you think that that requirement, where it actually says between the mixings, has something to do with another very important sacrifice? And Leviticus 6:20 could have a puzzle piece. And I'm saying, what would that sacrifice be? What would it be? Question number 3. Could it be that Yahuwah has a very special lesson to teach us through these supposed alarming discrepancies of Exodus 29 with Leviticus 6:20, because they are both very, very different? Could it be that there's a lesson that we need to learn? And I'm thinking Leviticus 6:20 must have a puzzle piece. And I'm wondering, is there a Torah discrepancy or not? Because there can't be a Torah discrepancy. We all know that. But what is it? What puzzle pieces have to go together? Well, we shall see. And here's the question of all. Covenant Calendar has been declaring this word evening Erev is the foundation of Yahuwah's whole calendar. You've heard us say that over and over and over. But next, I think we have discovered something very huge and really important, a really important question about morning. Here it is. Why isn't the word morning or boker declared? Why isn't morning declared the foundation of the calendar? Because morning is where the day starts. Why is evening declared the foundation of the calendar? And what puzzle pieces are going to provide the answer to that question? I think we're going to find out the next time. So we completed those 11 Torah references the last time. And today we looked over Leviticus 6:20. We've got that done. And the next time we're going to look at Deuteronomy 16:6. And we're going to see if there's any connection to Ben Ha-RBM or between the mixings in Deuteronomy 16:6. And if so, what is it? We're going to do that in the next lesson. And if we have enough time, we're going to do the patterns of between the mixings for Yahushua's Passover day and see how this all connects together, if there's something special that we can learn here. So that's it for tonight. And I'm going to use Tim's line. If you have any questions, just ask him, because he knows all about it. And there's our emails if you want to email us or contact us somehow through email at either Charlene or Tim, Study the Calendar. And also you can use calendar at Torah to the Tribes. I just like to thank everybody so much for being patient with us tonight. Thank you, and that's all she wrote.
And thank you, Charlene and Tim, for another excellent teaching. This one's kind of like Mario, but that's okay. Any comments? Thank you again, Charlene. Tim.
Don't feel bad, Mario. Trying to go over that and go over it for in my study time for an hour in the morning and trying editing. I was the one that had the deer in the headlights trying to connect all the different thoughts. So don't feel bad. You got to go over it a few times.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I was thinking too while this was going on, and it was kind of not. It seemed like it was presented like factually and questionably and decently and in order and all of that sort of thing. But I couldn't help thinking, how many priests are there today? How many Melchizedek priests are there around the world today, and all doing the work of the priesthood? And there's no way any one person could do this, but there is one Savior that this could represent, and the whole thing. But anyway, I was just like, what? Wait. So we still have the the mixings here, right? We still have the Ben Harim. There's still that space of time between. Okay, or is there not? Oh, there is still. Maybe there's. Oh, there is still, and I'm like felt like my head was like a bouncing ball. You know? But thank you. I see Tony, Tanya, and then Vivian had their hand raised, and then Walter. Walter, were you waving goodbye, or were you raising your hand also?
No, no, I was waving the hand.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I think Tanya was up first. Is that right?
Oh, hi, Mario. It's Cody.
Hey, Cody.
For some reason, when it logged in, it gave up her name. I don't know how to change it.
There's 3 dots over your picture, and you could click on those 3 dots and change it to whatever you want. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, next time.
Well, that wasn't my question, but thank you for answering that. Anyways, last week we had a discussion after about Rosh Hodesh, and we all thought that was